The episode starts in the Arabian Desert, Yemen. An explosion in the sky leads to a meteor crashing to Earth, skidding across the sand. Dust cloud rises as the cylindrical object emits a loud shriek, blasting an unexpected farmer across the desert. Fast forward to Oklahoma, where John Bell Tyson was getting ready for his last day at work. His wife reminds him that his retirement is just a new beginning. Bell steps out quietly and heads to his office. His first task was to investigate a stolen truck. However, he notices crop circles and a strange pattern of birds circling above, which seems ominous. Bell then decides to investigate further. In Tokyo, Japan, Captain Murai, a businesswoman, attends a JSAA press conference. She was preparing for a long mission aboard the ISS, overseen by communications expert Mitsuki, and Mitsuki and Murai share a connection as they run diagnostics on the shuttle. Bell discovers a large crater in the crops and an abandoned car nearby. As he examines the scene, a swarm of locusts descend, and Daniel, the missing man from the area, is nowhere to be found, and Bell believes he's been abducted. This incident triggers a wider epidemic in Long Island, where the Milik family gathers at a hospital. Children at a nearby school were suffering from nosebleeds, except for Luke. Anisha and Ahmed, worried about their children, try to rescue them. Their daughter Sarah was still bleeding, so they visit Dr. Lockhart, and the doctor finds nothing wrong and advises them to take it easy. Later, Ahmed sneaks away and Anisha discovers that he's cheating on her, and she tracks him to a secluded house and sees it for herself, leaving her kids in the car. Devastated, Anisha returns home and eats while her kids sleep on the couch, and she finds Ahmed's lover, Amanda Hornsby, on LinkedIn and likes all her posts out of spite. The checks on the shuttle complete and the shuttle launches successfully, and Mitsuki returns to her apartment. When Ahmed comes home, they argue, but their confrontation is interrupted by a power outage, and fire breaks out in the neighborhood, indicating that this is not an isolated incident. In space, something breaches the HOSHI-12 shuttle, leaving the astronauts in stunned silence, likely leading to their demise. Back on Earth, Bell was not feeling celebratory about his retirement, and he returns to the crop circle and prays for a sign. Suddenly, a tentacle strikes him in the neck, killing him instantly. The camera pans up to reveal an invisible ship departing, and we are not alone. The next scene opens with the Milik family in Long Island, huddled together as debris rains down from the sky, causing chaos in the streets. Seeking safety, Ahmed suggests that they hide in the basement, and in the confined space, tension rises between Anisha and Ahmed, prompting Ahmed to venture outside to investigate. The street was in disarray, and no one knows what to do. Meanwhile, in London, a group of kids arrives at school, and amongst them was Casper Morrow, and he struggles with social anxiety, and is bullied by an obnoxious student, and has a crush on a fellow student, Jamila. It was a school trip day, and kids board the bus, ready for outing. Electronics begin to malfunction as the bus hits a pothole, and Casper's sketchbook falls and is picked up by Jamila. In Tokyo, Mitsuki receives devastating news about the HOSHI-12, and at JASA, she learns that the ISS had gone completely dark, and both the Russians and NASA are experiencing similar widespread issues. Despite the setbacks, the Japanese team manages to restore the video feed from the HOSH-12, revealing the ship's ripped hull. In a new location in the US combat outpost in Kandahar province, Afghanistan, Trevante Ward was grappling with estranged family relations and the immense pressure of leading his platoon, carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. Strangely, the debris has hit every house except Ahmed's, and screaming from inside brings Ahmed and Anisha running back to find Sam clutching his head in agony, repeatedly yelling stop. Suddenly, Sam is fine and the lights come back on, indicating he might be receiving telepathic messages. As they enjoy the music, Casper notices sheep flocking together before debris starts raining down from the sky, and the bus swerves off the road and trembles down a steep cliff. Anisha overhears Ahmed secretly talking to his mistress, and the glass shatters in their house, blowing out their windows. Having had enough, Anisha decides to leave, packing her belongings, and during this, with the kids in the car, Ahmed reveals he was planning to leave Anisha that week. She dismisses his revelation and insists on driving, and as the news spreads across the city, Mitsuki sinks into a deep depression. The American soldiers eventually reach a small town where villagers greet the US soldiers, and with the help of a translator, they learn about an attack near a school, and when they arrive, they find the roof caved in, and a lone student with a bloody nose and a trance-like state, drawing circles on a table repeatedly. All the children point toward a dust cloud on the horizon, indicating the direction that they need to go to. Trevente and his crew push through the dust cloud and encounter a towering, strange tripod. They unleash a barrage of bullets on the object, but it remains unaffected. Suddenly, a powerful pulse emanates from the tripod, knocking them to the ground. Trevente grasps for air, pulling himself free from the sand covering his body. His comrades were gone, and the place is a wasteland, and the tripod is nowhere to be seen. Trevante eventually makes it back to his transport, but when he checks the laptop, none of the signals were responding. He leaves a hopeful message about the attack, but the situation looked grim. Meanwhile, the Malik family realizes that they're not the only ones trying to leave town. The roads were completely packed and worse, and New York is plunged into a blackout. Outside London, Casper scrambles free from the school bus, with all the other kids joining him. Most have minor cuts and bruises, considering the bus's huge tumble. The bus driver, however, is the only major casualty. In Tokyo, Mitsuki continues to reel from the loss of Burai and the other astronauts. With no food, miles of desert stretching on, the water was in thin supply. Trevente begins to hallucinate until a traveler in the desert finds him, and the traveler helps patch him up and agrees to travel with him at dawn. As night turns to day, the Malik family reaches a gas station, but tensions are high, especially when a couple of guys hurl racist remarks at Ahmed. Anisha, making a big decision, grabs her car keys left on the side and takes off, and the JSAA is plunged into chaos in the wake of coordinated attacks across the globe. An independent review was being conducted, but Mitsuki is convinced that she's the only one who can save the day. She takes a badge from her superior and breaks into the vault in the basement. Meanwhile, Anisha notices Ahmed sobbing on the floor, looking at his phone. It turns out Luke had a chunk of metal, presumably from a downed satellite, outside their old house, and he hides this from his parents, indicating a calm before the storm. Authorities declare a state of emergency, and as daylight breaks, the family is forced to move on again. Anisha glumly looks at Ahmed's phone while he was out of the car, finding baby scan photos. She realizes that Ahmed's affair is more serious than she thought, and she sees a sonogram picture. She reconsiders leaving Ahmed and locking him out of the car instead of confronting him with her findings in front of her kids. In Japan, Mitsuki was interviewed about the space shuttle incident, and his superiors speculate that space junk may have crashed into the ship and decide not to discipline her for breaking into the vault and stealing a badge. Trevente is led through the desert to a nearby town, and it's eerie quiet as he makes his way to the hospital, finding numerous people around. Following a signal, Trevente descends into the basement alone, discovering one of his own there. Gunshots above signal more fighters were coming, confirming the English-speaking doctor's warning. Casper notices chunks of the downed satellite and realizes he sketched this himself. Opening his book to confirm, he sees that the Russian block capitals he wrote match the chunk of metal completely. Mitsuki confronts Ikiro for hiding his daughter's sexuality from the world. Ikiro reveals he wanted Murai to open up and tell the world, but she chose to keep it a secret, causing their estrangement. Ahmed and Nisha finally find Luke with a stranger in the woods, and this man offers them shelter for the night. Trevente, seemingly the only healthy soldier, fights his way through several rogue enemies to a nearby car. All the characters continue their struggles, and Motley is pushed out by the kids, and Anisha and her family seek refuge with the stranger in the woods, and Mitsuki's conversation is interrupted as the ground begins to shake. Trevente navigates the desert gun in hand and drives back to base. The place was deserted, and realizing he was alone, he grabs his knife, a gun, and a picture of his wife. Heading to the comms tent, he tries to radio for backup and discovers a document about an emergency evacuation and an unknown entity. Anisha volunteers to go to the store for supplies despite Luke's worries, and she reassures him that she'll be fine. In England, the kids find a stack of chocolates in an abandoned truck, and as they eat, Casper accuses the radio in the front and hears an emergency broadcast. A shrill ringing sends the kids grabbing their ears in pain. Two soldiers arrive and question Anisha, and when they learn she's a doctor, they convince her to help with the casualties. Anisha is introduced to David Barton and uses the alias Amanda. Monty rips out the radio, and he and Casper have a heart-to-heart before Jamila convinces the group to head home instead of staying by the truck. However, half the kids decide to stay, given that they have shelter and food. Anisha teams up with David for surgery, and she notices something moving in the open wound of her patient. It's a parasite and she pulls it out, saving the person's life. And in Japan, Mitsuki returns to the JSAA and confronts her superiors, and she plays the audio recording and learns that there are linguists at the JSAA trying to decipher the transmission. It was being kept from the public to avoid mass hysteria. Mitsuki realizes that this is a language without sound, indicating alien communication. JSAA was partnering with other space stations to figure this out, but Mitsuki was unhappy, knowing that the HOSH-12 incident will be overlooked due to the larger crisis. The President of the United States addresses the world, explaining that this global issue is connected, and she declares that they are not alone and announces a state of martial law. The scene begins with Anisha changing her mind and deciding to return to her family, and she stops the ambulance and races back down the abandoned road. Along the way, she encounters a ravaged military convoy, its soldiers mutilated. Anisha eventually reaches Patrick's cabin, but finds it deserted, with signs of recent occupancy. The kettle was still whistling on the gas hob, and something seems to be inside the house. Anisha scrambles up the rooftop and finds her family along with Patrick and Kel hiding, and they reveal that the aliens are inside the house. Suddenly, Sarah falls through the ceiling, landing hard on her back and crying out in pain. Anisha rushes to help her and they scramble into a closet, and Kel slips through the same hole Sarah did and is gruesomely mutilated by the creature. Anisha and Sarah deduce that the aliens move based on sound, and they sneak down to the basement to hide. Meanwhile, on the landing, Luke and Ahmed communicate with them using hand signals, and the scene is incredibly tense as Ahmed tries to quietly move the barricaded furniture blocking the door to escape. Anisha spots the creature and tries to warn Ahmed, but it was too late, and the creature pounces, knocking Ahmed down, and Anisha grabs the kids, smashes a window, and they escape to safety. As they scramble for the car, Patrick, still alive, throws them the key. However, Patrick is soon taken out by the alien, which then comes after the kids. Anisha, armed with the chunk of metal Luke had found, stabs the creature multiple times, eventually killing it, and Ahmed stumbles out of the house, and alive but severely wounded. The family manages to get into the car and drive away, leaving the horror behind, at least for now. Trevente attempts to make his way back to the airfield, and along his way, he encounters a local family who breaks the bad news to him. The airbase had been destroyed in a fight with the aliens. To show Trevente that they're peaceful, the locals offer him food and encourage him to join them on their journey to Cabal, which is over 200 miles away, and they plan to walk. Back in the UK, Casper and the kids come across a woman speeding through a small village in her car, clearly shaken from the invasion. In Japan, Mitsuki claims she's led the project's specialist and gains entry to a satellite station that had been relaying information to the Ministry of Defense. Trevente bundles the locals into his car and starts driving to Kabul, and along the way they discuss the horrors that they've seen in combat and from the invasion. At the satellite station, Mitsuki meets an enthusiastic but naive guy named Yoshi and takes control, and she shows the signal to the team and tries to find its origin to send a message back. In the UK, after wishing the kids luck, the woman in the car leaves them, and Casper and the others begin traveling through the urban jungle, and before parting ways, Monty and Casper reconcile, and Ahmed regains consciousness and can walk, and they reach an abandoned diner and settle in and make hamburgers, switching on the breakers. Mitsuki and her team uncover a noise that seems like music, and Yoshi likens it to switching on a million radios at once. Mitsuki deduces that they're listening to a hive mind network. Anisha and her family head to the Northview College, which has been turned into an emergency evacuation center. Inside, Anisha, using the alias Dr. Lockhart, is greeted by David, who was working there, and the place is secure with many soldiers on standby. Casper and Jamila, now alone, discuss his sketches and his connection with the aliens, and Casper mentions a voice that communicates with him, and before he can elaborate, they are startled by an alien creature nearby. Gunfire startles it, sending it over the fence. Trevente and the family make it to Kabul airport, which is completely abandoned. They find hope when a family changes through the terminal to the landing strip outside, where a single military-controlled aircraft was on the runway. Trevente jumps ahead to the queue, flashes his credentials, and bargains with the soldiers, offering his gun for safe passage. God watches over you, says a grateful man as the door closes and the plane prepares to take off. Mitsuki continues searching for a single signal amongst many, and she suggests using filtering techniques to narrow the search, and while working, Mitsuki uncovers a rogue satellite, which turns out to be the HOSHI-12's distress signal, and she was determined to track down the signal, but was interrupted as soldiers arrive and pull her and the others away from the console just as she was about to communicate with the ship. Trevente arrives in the UK amidst a heavy downpour that drowns out most conversations. Despite the rain, he learns that he's grounded and no flights are leaving the UK, and Sergeant Harris, the officer in charge, offers him a pistol and safe passage out of the facility as the best help that he can provide. Meanwhile, Anisha becomes closer to Barton, who admits over lunch that he's divorced and appreciates her presence. Luke, exploring the hallways, meets a boy named Jack, and in Japan, Mitsuki was handcuffed in an office with a silent guard. The recent communication with Hinata has unsettled everyone, and Akira arrives and informs Mitsuki that the remnants of the shuttle are in geosynchronous orbit with fixed coordinates. Hoshi-12 is their only link with the alien visitors, and Mitsuki is crucial for communication. After a discussion with Akira, she's released to lead the comms team. Armed with a handgun, Trevente heads to the capital and finds blockage throughout the city. The city was in chaos with thick black smoke blowing the streets deserted. Trevente uses a phone booth to call home but only reaches his wife's voicemail, and her message directed at him conveys his belief that this war is unwinnable and expresses regret for their strained relationship. Anisha and Barton, while discussing their situation in a hallway, end up sharing a kiss. Mitsuki reopens the shuttle communication channel, hoping to contact the alien despite the uncertainty of their response. In London, Casper and Jamila return home to find Casper's mother dead, and Casper, who had been drawing the aliens for some time, shares his belief with Jamila that he must communicate with them. Convinced that he holds the key for defeating the invaders, he prepares to take action. Continuing her work, Mitsuki uses machine translation gear to attempt communication with the alien language. On their way to a hospital, Casper and Jamila encounter Trevente in a bar, drowning his sorrows. Casper reveals that he sees the aliens during his seizures and shows Trevente a sketch that includes the skull insignia from his platoon, prompting Trevente to agree to help. Luke stands transfixed by the alien bodies as the black goo starts to vanish. Anissa witnesses this too, leading the staff to try to understand the phenomena. Feeling defeated, Mitsuki realizes the futility of working against such advanced beings, and instead she broadcasts thousands of pictures and videos of Hinata across all radio frequencies. The scene starts with a flashback where Mitsuki and Hinata grew closer, with Hinata endearingly calling Mitsuki full of stars. As Hinata continues with space-themed compliments, they share a kiss, and this leads to a surreal scene where Hinata swims through space, somehow propelling himself forward with a breaststroke until she reaches the spaceship and manages to communicate with Mitsuki. Meanwhile, Trevente, Casper, and Jamila arrive at the hospital, and they aggressively confront a neurologist, forcing her to induce a seizure in Casper to facilitate communications with the aliens. Concurrently, scientists conduct tests on the alien specimen using the metal shard Luke found. With Anissa close by, the scientist applies hydrochloride, causing the specimen to completely disintegrate. The exact mechanism was unclear, but it leads the Milik family to head to the Pentagon, and at the hospital, Casper was connected to an MRI machine. With a headset on, he induces a seizure, and during their journey to the Pentagon, the Milik family is ambushed by rogue bandits who open fire, overturning their trucks. During his seizure, Casper experiences a series of visions, revealing a pattern that allows him to see through the alien's eyes. When Jamila appears in his vision, Casper suddenly realizes that the aliens have arrived. The alien seems to have a fix on Casper's location and pursue him, and Trevente locks Casper in a closet and confronts the alien using a gas canister to create a massive jet of fire, burning the creature despite the sprinkler system dousing the hallway with water. The Milik family escapes in the woods but is pursued by the bandits, and Ahmed sacrifices himself to buy time for the others to flee. Anisha, running with the kids, trembles down a hill into a sea of black goo, and she uses the metal shard to navigate them safely across. Mitsuki, trying to establish communication, asks, "What do you say the first time you came home?" And in response, David Bowie's music briefly plays over the speakers, catching Mitsuki off guard before it fades away. Casper manages to telepathically connect with the aliens again, demanding that they stop their attack. Surprisingly, the aliens agree and freeze in place, and realizing Luz is crucial to stopping the invasion, Trevente takes him out of the hospital as he passes out. A sudden blinding flash draws everyone's attention to the sky as the nuke detonates, lighting up the remnants of the shuttle with brilliant flashes. As the scene unfolds, the aliens have been defeated, according to news reports across the world, and Mitsuki heads home, wallowing in her own grief, while the rest of Japan celebrates the aliens being destroyed. Meanwhile, Trevente brings Casper back inside the hospital, desperate to bring him back from the brink. He's unconscious and in a rough way, and he's loaded into the MRI machine, with his life hanging in the balance. Both Jamila and Trevente check the readings, but he was not responding, and there was no reactivity, and the EEG is flat, and Casper is dead. Out in the woods, Anissa tries to find Ahmed. Blood spatters on the tree seems to hint that he's been killed. Trevente has given up and decides to leave, and he refuses to watch Casper being taken off life support, and despite Jamila's protest for him to stay, Trevente eventually walks away, where all the people in the streets cheer, celebrating the end of the invasion. Anisha and the kids make it up to an abandoned house, where Anisha sees news reports confirming that the aliens have been defeated. Luke was convinced that they can return home now, but Anisha was not so sure. This ultimately tears the kids apart as they disagree with Anisha's plan to hold tight. Mitsuki begins wandering down the streets. Only she runs into a Buddhist monk who convinces her to head up with him to his temple. Trevente does eventually manage to head back to base, but not before answering some questions about what he's experienced. The officer in charge updates him on what they believe the aliens are doing, and the strange black substance on the ground appears to be a hint that the aliens were looking to terraform the planet. Meanwhile, over in the Amazon rainforest, several helicopters show up toward a giant ship that crash-landed, and wearing hazmat suits, several scientists head inside and seem to make contact, with the walls vibrating. After saying goodbye to Ahmed, Luke wanders off and ends up throwing the metal shard in frustration through the forest. However, up in the sky, he sees the northern lights and appears to react toward it. Up at the temple, Mitsuki awakens and uses her laptop to move the satellite dish remotely. Out by the beach, Trevente checks through Casper's sketchbook and finds strange symbols which actually read star. Casper inexplicably awakens after his brain has completely shut down, hinting that these aliens can control people after they've died. Wandering through a strange dreamscape, Casper is handed a red box by Ukuro, which holds a compass inside. The same compass that was discussed with Mitsuki, and as he looks at the needle, it begins spinning inexplicably. As Trevente was by the beach with his wife, the sea starts moving out rapidly, inexplicably changing to low tide as a giant, and flower-shaped alien vessel comes into view on the skyline. And the episode ends as everyone starts staring at the sky.
And with that, the movie ends. We hope you enjoyed our recap. Like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing recaps. See you in the next one.